Samito just made a video about how 6v6 was the better way of playing Overwatch, and I absolutely agree with him. There's a few points that he made, and a few points that I'll make here that I think are fairly unique, and I haven't seen them at all within the Overwatch community. And this really is because the vocal majority of Overwatch are professional players. They're people who focus mostly on balance, and they're people who focus mostly on, I guess, the systems within the structure of Overwatch and how that affects them in terms of their productivity. Now, without a doubt, 6v6 was better. If you disagree with me, please go in the comments right now. Tell me about how you think 5v5 was better and how, well, you're actually wrong, because you are wrong, without a doubt. Because in the end, and I'm going to come back to this over and over again, balance is actually not the purpose of a game. Any game's balance is just there to make the highest end of the game fun. That's really all it is. Because games can be fun without there being a high end. Games can be great without, like, they can just be like physics-based games, or you can imagine creative Minecraft or all those other games out there that are just, there's no real objective to them in terms of winning or losing. But the fun of a game comes from the amount of situations that you can put your brain in that are relatively unique, that you have a little bit of control over, but are kind of out of your control, and that you have to respond to and figure out solutions to. So, like, it's very, very clear that even though balance is somewhat of a focus in Overwatch, balance should not be the focus of Overwatch and should never be the focus of Overwatch. Simple as that. Why? Because it's a game. Now, once you have the game part together, then you can focus on balance later on. Many will disagree with me in some ways, but I'm going to actually show you later on a little bit how that matters to everybody. It should matter to everybody. Because balance should be a function and not the value of that function. What do I mean by that? Well, back in the original days of Overwatch, balance was all over the place. We know this for sure. Certain things were too powerful, certain things were too weak. If you played a hero, you're probably going to win most of the fights, and there's a lot of things that you could exploit to make your life easier in the game. But a lot of those exploits, quote-unquote exploits, had counterbalance in their mechanics. A lot of us original Overwatch players learned very early on that, let's say, for example, well, I can use a very simple one that we still use today, is that a sleep dart counters a Genji blade, a dragon blade, which is extremely obvious to the average Overwatch player. But if you think about it, the numbers in those abilities don't matter that much, because really the purpose of the blade is you get up close to somebody, you whack them a few times, and they're dead. Now, of course, you could balance the ult back and say, okay, you only get one swing, and that's what matters the most. But if you take the general idea of the ability, and you look at the general idea of the counter ability, which is the sleep, the function, the act of taking somebody doing one thing and stopping them, CCing them, is the balance, right? That is the core of the balance. Now, we didn't apply this to really anything else past probably my thought. I think this actually went downhill with the release of Ashe, which is fairly interesting. Some may argue in other cases, Brig being kind of one of those characters. But I'll go into that in a second too. But when you design some form of strong ability in the game, you should have something with a function, a built-in function that counters that thing. The biggest argument that a lot of professional players had, and I absolutely agree, was double shields was absolutely terrible. Roll lock needed to be a thing because, while you just stack all tanks, you stack health, and you go into the battle and you win. But this is where the Overwatch team didn't seem to have the creativity to counterbalance for these abilities. What they did, which is really frustrating, is they balanced the numbers. So for me, a simple answer to something like double shields would be an ability that blows holes in shields. Just to satisfy the more experienced players out there, you go, wait, what do you mean blow a hole in the shield? Well, if you look at the counters for that, let's say you're playing a Reinhardt, and someone uses an ability on your shield, and it puts a literal hole in your shield, right? Well, as a Reinhardt, you put the shield down, you put it back up, that hole is fixed. You take something like Orisa, who has the shield down on the ground, and it has to sit there. The Orisa has to wait. Even if the hole's been blown in the shield, it has to wait for another shield, then to put that shield down, or then to fix that hole in that shield. If you take someone like Sigma, who's halfway in between, has to commit to the shield a little bit, but also can recall it. If he gets a hole blown in his shield, he then has to recall the shield and put it back up again. In the mechanics of something that blows holes in shields, it adds a whole bunch of counterplay. And that means that if you were to stack too many shields on your team, and the enemy team had this ability that blows holes in shields, well, not only will the ability that blows holes in shields counter one shield character, it'll counter two shield characters and have sort of a snowball effect. The more shields you have on the field, the more holes that can be blown through the shield. Another example of this I like to use is an ability that changes a shield from an enemy shield to an ally shield. Well, that's pretty simple too. Reinhardt has his shield up. Suddenly the ability changes the shield. Well, he drops it, he brings it up again, it's now his ally shield again. That gets fixed really easily with just a little bit of counterplay. Now, the more shields you stack, technically the more shields the enemy team would have. You could have a lot of other abilities like this in Overwatch. Like, picture a character that gets more powerful the more health is on the field. That way when you start stacking tanks, then, well, that character is going to get more of whatever ability that they have. A good example of this, they tried to a little bit, and this is what I hate. Again, balancing the numbers doesn't matter at all. Because Symmetra's ability to charge her laser up, her ammo up on shields is a good way of at least dipping your toes into the level of counterbalance that could happen in Overwatch. But rather than doing that, we went in the opposite direction, said we don't like shields, so we're just going to physically remove one of those shields. Now, 5v5 versus 6v6 at its core. Why would someone go with 5v5? They go with 5v5 because it's easier to balance and it's easier to understand. But I'm going to argue that games are not about understanding. Games are about what you don't understand and attempting to learn about that problem and solving that problem, solving the thing that you don't understand. So later on, when you come back to that thing, you have more experience and you can now walk through whatever problem you originally had to run through. It's really important when it comes to the success of games. People know this. And I find like RPGs, for example, they artificially boost your way through certain things. If you're level 1 and you go through, you're going to have a hard time. If you're level 100 and you go through, it's going to be an easy time. But you still get that level of feeling like, hey, I learned something here. I know how to get through this problem a lot easier than I did before. Well, 6v6 versus 5v5 versus 4v4 versus 3v3. 6v6 is that barrier where the game becomes extremely hard to understand. And it's the barrier. This is really, really important to, like, you gotta. So I know this because I've run Sunday Scrub Club Scraps. If you haven't seen it, go into my video somewhere along here, hunt it down. You'll see I got tons and tons of scraps. So we play 2v2s, 1v1s, 3v3s, 4v4s, 5v5s. And even 6v6s occasionally here in Overwatch 2. Fortunately, not 7v7s because it's limited. It doesn't let me do that. But we have found, especially, that when you are playing something like a 4v4, it's just a little bit too simple. You can understand most things that are going on. Even in 1v1s, like I'm really good at 1v1s. I can probably take on most GM players. I'm a mid-diamond player. I can take on most GM players 1v1 confidently. It's a little difficult. I'm not going to lie. It's not like I won't struggle, but I can't. When you add 2v2 in, then that takes a little bit more skill on my end because I now have to think about, well, what was the second person going to do? The more people you put in, the more that high elo matters because the person is able to take into account things that are actually extremely hard to take into account. We humans have this natural understanding of 5s, 3s, and 5s. Pretty much. If you go look it up, there's a lot of theory behind it. It's best to give somebody 5 tasks. It's best to give somebody 5 things to remember. Any more than that, you start to get confused because actually what people do is they group things into 3. So you have 5 things. You can actually group them into 2 2s and 1 1, and your brain does this. Go look it up. A lot of psychology stuff behind that. When you add a 6 person, you add this impossible layer in where the brain can sort of group things together, right? Now we can tell the difference between my thumb and my 2 fingers, even though I've grouped them together here. I don't know, it's a simple analogy, but we're going to go with it anyways. I've grouped them together, and then let's say we group together my thumb with another finger. Technically, we have 3 groups of 2. Now, the brain does is it simplifies that. It goes, well, these are 2 types of fingers, these are 2 types of fingers, and these are 2 thumbs. That's what we did. Sorry, I got kind of hiccups here too going on. I'm not going to redo this video. We're going to keep going with this. the brain groups it, and that's why we have tanks, we have healers, and we have support. Without even like enforcing that in the original Overwatch, that tended to be how people wanted to play the game. They wanted to group their tanks together, they wanted to group their supports together, and they wanted to group their DPS together. That's great, that's fine. But what's happened is you've removed that extra layer of something that you actually have to keep track of. And now you can easily keep track of all 5 things. Relatively keep track of all 5 things. It's a heck of a lot easier too. It's not necessarily about balance. Now, a lot of people will argue about why would you balance the game given these certain abilities and certain structure that exist within Overwatch. Now, I agree. If you took Overwatch in its existing state at 6v6 and you wanted to create that balance, remember, which is the end result of creating a game, the balance as the end result, and you want to make it easier to balance, you're actually removing the game part of it, because the game part is the thing that you don't understand. Let's say you go on a roller coaster. Most of the time, the first time you go on the roller coaster, it's scary. It's up, down, you're freaking out. Now, if you've been like me and you spend a lot of time at a park, an amusement park, you end up going on the roller coaster quite a few times. After the 3rd or 4th time, that roller coaster starts to seem boring. Why? Because the expectation, the thing that you didn't know that would happen, like your coaster flying off the tracks, now becomes something you don't even need to think about. So that second tank, which was your roller coaster that could fly off the tracks, eventually you take that unknowingness away, you know that you're never going to get off the tracks. Now, what's really funny is the average person will want to go on a ride that potentially will not fall apart. If you ask the average person and you go, do you want to ride on this ride? Maybe potentially, but not really. Actually, you might fall off it. Versus going, you'll never, ever, ever, ever fall off this ride. The average person is always going to pick the option of never falling off the ride. But that's not a fun roller coaster. That is not a fun game. You always want to have something that is just a little bit more than what you can comprehend to create a fun game, because then you have to create something in your brain to survive it. You're on that roller coaster, you're going around, you got to convince yourself, really, hey, I'm not going to fall off this roller coaster. Super important within gaming, the gaming industry. With any game, that is the key thing. If you take any battle royale game, we have 100 people all fighting for one specific area, one specific winner chicken dinner. There are so many things that you don't understand that people will break it down into play styles, and they'll break these crazy complicated things down into structures that they can now comprehend. Even though there's things going on within the world, you'll never know what ability or what item someone got across the area from you until you see that person then and there. So what people do is they do that grouping, right? You take your fingers, you start to group them together. You go, these are these type of fingers, these are type of that type of fingers. When you take that away and you no longer have to group, you know exactly what is in the package. You know you're getting exactly 3 fingers. I know I've ranted about this for a while, but it is really important to understand. Why would you have 6 people instead of 5 people instead of 4 people? Why do you not go to 7 people? I don't know if we ever considered that. Why don't we go to 7 people in Overwatch? The higher elos will say it's because of balance. The developers will also say it's because of balance. But it's not because of balance. It's because of the amount of things that we have to group together to understand. So even though we crave to know something, we crave to know that the roller coaster will never ever fall off its tracks, it's still that much more fun to not know. And if we're doing the roller coaster every single day, I live in Vancouver, there's a wonderful wooden roller coaster here at the PNE, or Playland, sorry, that you can go try out. There's always that mindset. Everything in the roller coaster says that you might fall off, even though you won't. It's guaranteed pretty much that you won't. But if you take a modern roller coaster that everything's strapped in, you feel a lot more safe. Maybe for the illusion of the first ride, it's fun. But there needs to be something there that just unsettles you just a little bit. There needs to be that 6th player. I absolutely think it's that. So again, even though we crave the understanding, it's the process of the understanding that creates the game. It's the task over and over again that creates the game. Now, excuse me. People may also say too, originally and as of now, that the tank role is relatively purposeless. Oh man, I gotta get these hiccups gone before I do this kind of stuff. It's purposeless, meaning it's just not fun. And why is it not fun? Because you only have 4 other real problems to deal with and 1 other problem that you can easily keep track of. Like, it's really not too hard to figure out where that one tank is. You're never ever going to go, or the average pro is never going to go, where did he come from? They kind of are. Don't get me wrong. This is X-Men. But at a 6th person, and you will guarantee that a few times a game, something will happen where you'll have to go, where did he come from? You'll have to, because that roller coaster is a wooden roller coaster now. It's not as secure. It's not as straightforward. Now, of course, you could balance a tank and say, hey, what if this tank had no damage at all? Well, here's the cool thing about games and the cool thing about roles. Not everybody plays things for one specific reason. Not everybody plays things for the same reason. Some people will choose things that are unfun because the task of doing the unfun thing is fun to them. Take an average tank player from Overwatch 1, the first one. Without a doubt, Genji is a much more fun character to play. Every tank player will tell you that. But the tank players that go, no, Reinhardt is more fun, mean that Reinhardt is more satisfying. They've picked a specific section. They've picked a specific task or challenge, and they put them to it. There used to be a lot of people like this in Overwatch. We used to have hundreds, thousands of people that didn't mind picking the unfun role. Now, what's funny is that percentage of people who choose to do that in any population is the exact same percent. Even though tank role has insta-queues and everyone else has to wait longer, it's not fun in the activity, it made the game significantly more fun because it allowed people to select whether or not they wanted to go crazy with explosions and whatever, or they wanted to focus specifically on, do I stand this way? It's like I'm doing MMA recently, but it's like an MMA fighter deciding to put their foot forward an inch or two and figuring out how to breathe and how to throw that punch. It's all the specific, that the act of figuring the thing out is the fun, versus somebody who wants to go to the jungle gym and swing around and do all the body movements, but not have any precision. Now, of course, there's going to be some exceptions too with DPS and whatnot, but that percent of the population is always going to be the same. So if you remove any other part of that and you change your population in any way, the amount of people that will do that unfun thing for the satisfaction is going to be the exact same. The purpose of the person is up to the person. What happened when we shaved out all this, we got rid of all of those tank players. We basically just got rid of them. We said only the people that want to have fun can stay here and play. We actually got rid of a whole bunch of hardcore, real value-based players. Oh my gosh, I don't want to redo this video. I'm not going to do it. We got rid of them, and we're left with nobody that wants to play tank anymore. Because all of the things that mattered to the tank, and I'm going to come back in full circle, all of the things that mattered to a tank in Overwatch 1 were focused on dealing with the unknowns. That was your job, is you dealt with all of the unknowns. You dealt with all of the things that your DPS and your supports couldn't deal with. Your job was to protect them from those unknowns. But when you remove that, you remove the core of the tank role. And you shave it down into something where you're just going through the motions. People complain about Overwatch tanks right now just being counterpicking. It's just all counterpicking. You pick one character, you pick another character, you pick another character, because it's no longer about the nuance of how am I shielding this, how am I blocking this, how am I doing this. It is now a single path. I see all the characters in front of me. I see all the abilities in front of me. I see all of the options in front of me. Here's what I have to do or else I lose. Why is this such a big problem in Overwatch? Well, it's because of Blizzard's closed garden community, their closed garden service. A lot of other games, people actually have the ability to balance outside of the game. They can run their own little community events. They can run their own balance. They can run their own servers. They can run everything for themselves. And if the company doesn't, and it's not always true, I want to be very clear. I know there's a whole industry out there that doesn't care about the closed wall garden stuff. But personally, as an old school gamer, I know for sure, and I can use even Minecraft as an example because this is a response to one of Samito's videos. The Minecraft community understands Minecraft balance more than anybody else, or understands the totality of Minecraft balance more than anybody else understands their own games, which is really frustrating. Now, people are going to disagree and say, no, there's so much disagreement in PvP and stuff. Understanding all the functions of balance are different than understanding the balance of a very specific system. That's very, very clear. And even agreeing on what that balance should be. Because us as Overwatch players can't go create our system. And if you guys want to take a look, I've done my best with the Sunday Scrub Club scraps. Every single Sunday, we get together, we play custom games. I don't feel like that's been able to grow. Personally, I don't feel like I'm able to maintain any of that change that I put into that, into any of that work that I put into changing the game. And I don't feel like those changes have any impact on the world, on the community of Overwatch at all. Because people don't care about it. People don't care about these external changes. Now, of course, there's a lot involved with the workshop and how that's set up. But if you take a game, for example, like Counter-Strike or Team Fortress 2, which people complain about being dead games all the time, but they have record numbers across the board over the past few months, like crazy record numbers. You have to see how they've been developed in parallel to their community's love of the game. The community has gone out, experimented, come back with all those experiments. Valve has gone, oh, well, at least let's try and emulate a little bit of those experiments. And even if Valve hasn't been perfect in it, at least there's enough options outside of Valve's balance for people to love these games no matter what. This is where Overwatch has failed. This is where Blizzard has failed. This is where we as the community have failed ourselves. Blizzard has failed us. We cannot create parallel balance. There's very little opportunity for that. There's very little opportunity for parallel development. And so Blizzard ends up doing one single line of balance the entire time, making a mistake and not being able to go back on it. Because once you lose all of the McCree mains, they don't come back because you rebuff McCree. You lose them all. Simple as that. Once you lose all of the off tanks, they don't come back. It is simple as that. But if you give them opportunities outside your closed garden, they never leave. Even if Blizzard leaves the gamer will never leave Blizzard if Blizzard gives them the opportunity. Anyways, thank you all so much. If you watched the whole thing, please comment below. Tell me you watched my entire rant. Tell me what you think, how you feel about Overwatch 2, and how you feel about the balance. I personally am sick of it. I still play the game because there's no other game out there that feels like Overwatch, but they failed the game. I have a lot of criticism too about the Pro League and how the Pro League has biased certain things away from being a game, but we can talk about that later. So, thanks guys. Subscribe. Sulak out.